Have you ever looked at a painting and thought, is it really done? Or heard that famous adage attributed to Leonardo da Vinci? Art is never finished, only abandoned. But is that true? Can art ever truly be finished? In today's video, we'll dive into this provocative question. We'll look at classical examples of artworks that were left incomplete. We'll explore the idea of non-finito, and we'll bring in what modern science and psychology say about creativity, completion, and letting go. Let's begin with a question. What does it mean for an artwork to be finished? Is it when the artist stops working? When it is delivered? When the audience views it? In the art historical world, scholars distinguish at least two senses of finished: the formal completion of technique and composition, and the intentional decision on the part of the creator that the work is done. Philosophers of art call this the difference between aesthetically complete and genetically complete. To illustrate, consider the case of The Adoration of the Magi by Leonardo da Vinci. He received the commission in Florence, but left the work unfinished when he departed for Milan. What remains is a life-size underdrawing with much of the surface unpainted. The question, is that painting finished? If the artist stopped working, but the audience sees a powerful image, is it done? Going further, the tradition of non-finito in sculpture and painting shows that artists sometimes deliberately leave work seemingly incomplete to emphasize the process, the block, the becoming. So one of our first theses, finishedness is not simply a matter of stopping work, but a matter of intention, context, and perception. Let's explore some striking examples from art history that challenge the idea of finished. Example 1, Leonardo's Adoration of the Magi. As mentioned, Leonardo began the work, but left Florence soon after. The panel remains in the Uffizi, with broad areas still underdrawn and unpainted. What happens when we view it? We see the composition, the figures, the energy, but we also see the in-process state, visible chalk lines, unfinished backgrounds. That visibility or process is part of its charm and its meaning. Thus, this unfinished piece asks us, can we regard it as complete in meaning, even if not complete in surface? Probably yes. Example 2. The non-finito sculptures and paintings. The concept of non-finito, not finished, was embraced especially in Renaissance sculpture. For example, Michelangelo Buonarroti left slab figures emerging from marble, deliberately showing the raw block. Another example, Pietà by Titian was expanded late in his life and left essentially unfinished at his death. Another hand touched it up. The art historical commentary is that unfinished works allow viewers to witness the actual thoughts of the artist, the trace marks, the underdrawing, the evolving composition. As the Metropolitan Museum notes, unfinished works may reveal the artist's actual thoughts. So here's another thesis. What we call unfinished sometimes becomes a feature, not a bug. The openness invites the viewer to imagine, complete, participate. You've heard it. Art is never finished, only abandoned. It's widely attributed to Leonardo. But when we inspect the history, the attribution is shaky. Researchers note that the saying was first clearly recorded for Paul Valéry. A work of art is never finished, only abandoned. But regardless of authorship, the phrase captures an important idea. Creators often face endless possibilities, and choosing to stop is itself an act. Thus, perhaps finished in art is less about perfection achieved and more about decision taken. So we've seen classical cases where finishedness is ambiguous. Let's turn to what psychology, neuroscience, and the science of creativity tell us, because they have something to say about when a work of art or any creative product is done. According to a study on the creative process in visual art students, there are distinct stages: immersion, reflection, idea, realization, specification, finalization, judgment, presentation. The finalization stage is described as a point where the student decides the work is done. In that study, one student said, "It's never finished. We always have stuff to add. But then there is a fixed date, and there it is finished." This points to the tension between internal readiness and external constraint. Therefore, completion is partly psychological. The creator must decide to stop. Another field, the neuroscience of creativity and art. The discipline of neuroaesthetics shows how our brains respond to artworks, particularly when they evoke meaning, emotional response, or effort behind them. A more specific study found that people tend to rate artworks labeled human created higher than those labeled AI generated, in part because they perceived more story, effort, and meaning behind them. Why is that relevant? Because finishedness is tied to perceived effort, intention, and the sense of the creator's involvement. If viewers feel the artist stopped but with intention, they may regard the work as done. If they feel it was abandoned due to confusion or interruption, maybe less so. So, scientific research backs up the idea that finishedness is a cognitive/psychological phenomenon as much as a technical one. One of the big challenges for creators is perfectionism and the desire to keep improving indefinitely. A study on burnout and art block among visual artists shows that perfectionism is a key risk factor. That means one of the reasons works stay unfinished is the fear of releasing something less than ideal. But science tells us this can hamper creativity, lead to delay, stress, and failure to let go. Also, in the broader research on creativity, the idea of honing theory argues that creative work evolves while the creator themselves evolves. If the creator changes, the work might never match the new creator. So at some point, a decision to stop is necessary. We can sum up: to finish something is as much about letting go and transitioning to the next as it is about reaching a final state of perfection. So what do we conclude? Here are several insights that the classical examples plus science converge on. In creative practice, continuing to tweak a work yields diminishing returns. One article about the quote says, if you spent another 100, 500, or 1,000 hours on it, how much better would it become? 10% better? 15%? There's a law of diminishing returns. In other words, at some point you must accept that a piece is good enough for its purpose, audience, and context, even if not perfect. Philosophers argue the genetic completeness of a work depends on a retrospective decision by the artist that the work, as produced, is the realized form of their intention, and a prospective decision not to alter it further. That means you as creator must step outside the work and say, this is the form. I stop now. If you don't, the work stays in progress, and so the audience may treat it as such. Especially in classical art, unfinished works allow the viewer to see process, to imagine possibilities, to engage differently. From a modern standpoint, when you release a piece, video, painting, book, it is now subject to audience context, feedback, culture. The finishedness partly depends on what the audience receives, not only what you produce. Finishedness doesn't have to be static. A work might feel finished at time A, only to be revisited later by the artist or others. Many great artists revisit things, but there is a difference between finishing and abandoning, to use the phrase. In practice, you finish a version, release it, let it stand. Then you may start a new version, a new work, rather than endlessly extend the current one. Let's talk practicalities. If you're a creator, painter, writer, filmmaker, musician, how can you apply these insights? And if you're a viewer or consumer of art, how might this change your perspective? Define your purpose and criteria for done. Before you start or early on, decide what your goal is. Deliverable time, audience, level of polish. Ask, when will I stop? What are the signs of completion rather than perfection? Recognize good enough and avoid paralysis. Accept that chasing perfection can lead to never releasing. The classical quote about abandon reminds us sometimes you stop to release. Use deadlines, peer feedback, audience check-ins to decide when to stop. Let go of fixing for the future. You may always see what you could improve. That doesn't mean you should. The creative process often evolves into a next piece. Mark the piece as done. Present it. Move on. Embrace the openness if desired. Some works intentionally leave room for the viewer's imagination, as with Nonfinito. If that is your intention, you may treat unfinished as a stylistic choice rather than a failure. When you look at a painting or piece of art and feel, is it done? Ask, does the piece communicate its intention? Does the artist stop somewhere? Does that version resonate? Don't assume unfinished always means incomplete or less valuable. The visible process can add meaning. Recognize your own judgment of completeness may differ from the artist's intention. That's okay. A work can be finished for the artist and still open for you. So, is art ever finished? The answer, sometimes, and only if the right conditions align. The artist reaches a point of decision. The work achieves internal coherence, intention, and is released. The context, audience, medium, time, recognizes it as a piece, but art can also remain intentionally unfinished, either by the artist's choice or circumstance, and still be powerful, complete in effect if not in polish. The line between finished and abandoned is thin, but the important move is letting go. Because if you keep reworking endlessly, the work becomes a mirror of your doubt instead of your intention. As artists, we create to express, to communicate, to engage. At some point, the work must stand on its own. At that point, it is finished. Not because it is flawless, but because it is done. As viewers, we can appreciate both the completed and the open-ended. We can enter the gap between what is there and what could be. In that gap lies meaning. So next time you look at a painting, a film, a piece of writing, ask, does this feel finished? And if you are a creator, am I ready to stop and release this? Because art can be finished, but maybe only when we decide it is.